Okay, can you see the slides?
Yes, can see.
Okay, good morning again, and nice to meet many Sambodhi friends, right? Okay, and though we are not able to meet in person, I think it's still good to meet virtually. So today's session is about compassion. So I think rather than talking about it as a doctrine itself, so we're going to see how this energy of compassion or as an attitude we can develop, okay, particularly in this pandemic. And I think we all know that we live in very unprecedented time, isn't it, in our history, more than a year now, right? And actually it has dramatically changed our everyday lives. And unfortunately, some have experienced illness, some have lost loved ones, some have lost their jobs, and most of the time we are also experiencing isolation, fear, anxiety, what else, low moods, right, and a lot of uncertainties in life. So the theme, I think, using the 4 sublime states or the 4 divine abidings are actually very timely. So today we're going to talk about compassion, right? So how do we live with compassion? In fact, Thich Nhat Hanh says that compassion is not a noun, it's a verb. It's a verb means it is something that we do, not something that we talk about, right? So how do we live with compassion? And in Buddhism, everything is interrelated. So you not only talk about compassion, you talk about like in the 4 Brahma Viharas, you talk about loving kindness, you talk about compassion and joy, you talk about compassion and equanimity. So each one of those energies, positive mental energies, they are actually inevitably linked to compassion, to our practice, right? So the 4 sublime states or the 4 Brahma Viharas are actually positive energies which we try to cultivate in our lives, right? So that's why we say we live with the 4 sublime states. They're called the 4 immeasurables because there's really no limit to how much we can practice them. Yeah. And the first pair, which is love and compassion, they are actually like intertwined, you know. So you can't really have love without having compassion, neither can you have compassion without having love. So how do we live with all these qualities? And the other point in Buddhism is that whatever we do, we're supposed to do it with mindfulness, isn't it? So that's again a very important part of it. And of course, not only to do it with mindfully, our compassion, is it based on wisdom? Do we manifest or do we express our compassion based on our right understanding? So this brings us then back to the core Buddhist teachings of the Eightfold Path, isn't it? So you find that within the Eightfold Path itself, you will find aspects of compassion in terms of the right thoughts that we have, thoughts of compassion. Then you have got right mindfulness, you got right thoughts and right views. So everything are actually interrelated. So that's why we say as a Buddhist, we practice the Eightfold Path. We don't just practice, for example, mindfulness alone. All right. We don't only practice precepts alone. So we have to combine all those wonderful aspects. All right. So I'm going to share with you some of my thoughts for maybe about 40 or 45 minutes, and then we'll end at about just before 11, so that we have about 30 minutes for us to have some discussions and Q&A. Okay. So let me start by just have some introduction here. Now, this word compassion today, you find that it is not something that is only found in you know, when you come to Buddhist temples. It has become a big thing. Just as many of you are familiar, like mindfulness has now swept the world. All right, everybody talking about mindfulness, and so much so that people forgot that it actually originated from what the Buddha talks about, you know, in the Satipatthana Sutta. So many people have forgotten about that, but mindfulness is everywhere, right? So likewise, compassion. So you do a quick search, for example, you go to Amazon, you find that there are easily 8,000 books that talks about compassion, right? So it's big thing and it's big business, you know, so you can make money by talking about compassion. And for example, 2 of the most well-known business magazines, Forbes and Harvard Business Review, they even have articles telling CEOs the benefits of running their companies more compassionately. Now, if you read Forbes magazine, which is a business magazine, I think almost every alternate issues they will have articles about how CEOs should manage their companies in this pandemic in a very compassionate way. So there's even this term called compassionate leadership, correct? And then you find that even well-known universities like Stanford University School of Medicine even started it's called a Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education. This was way back in 2008, and short is for CCARE. So if you Google CCARE, you find that the professor who actually started this center, the CCARE, Center for Compassion and Altruism, Dr. Jim Doty, he has regular discussions, conversations. In fact, there's a team called Conversations on Compassion, and he talks with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He talks with Tenzin Priyadasi. He talks with Thich Nhat Hanh. So he talks about with all these great Buddhist teachers about how do we apply compassion in the modern daily world. All right, so that's interesting. So if I even at universities, School of Medicine, they're talking about how neuroscience can actually study the importance of compassion. And later on, I'll show you why it is so important that all of us should practice compassion, because at the end of the day, compassion benefits us just as it benefits others. All right. So that's a very interesting research that's been found. If you, as I say, if you just Google CCARE or Stanford University Center for Compassion and Altruism, there's a lot of research which shows how by practicing compassion ourselves, we have better health, better well-being, better happiness. And isn't that what we all want? All right. So that explains why everybody is jumping on this bandwagon of talking about compassion. All right. So that it begins to lose its Buddhist roots, or it loses its shall I say, its religious origin. So that's why we call it secular in that sense. But it is good. It benefits people. So that's compassion today. Yeah. Now, of course, in the context of today's talk, I want to anchor it back to what John mentioned early on about the four Sublime States. Now, you can read the details. This is found in the Brahma Vihara Sutra itself. And then where the Buddha talks about the loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. So today I'm going to focus more on compassion, and I'm sure somebody else will speak to you about loving kindness. But inevitably, I will also have to touch on loving kindness because they are actually quite inseparable. So, but first we need to understand what's the difference between love and compassion. All right. So if you look at loving kindness, the Pali word is metta. Those of you who are more familiar with the Chinese or the Tibetan tradition, which uses Sanskrit, it's called Maitri. So from the word Maitri, you got Maitreya. You know, the future Buddha, Maitreya Buddha. So Maitreya, the word Maitreya actually is a Sanskrit word for metta, which is in Pali, which I think we all use. So loving kindness. So loving kindness is primarily the wish for another being to have well-being and happiness. So when you make that wish, may all be well and happy. May all of you be free from suffering. May all of you be free from the COVID-19 virus. So you're actually making a wish of loving kindness. You're radiating your love towards others. So that's a very good attitude. It's a very good energy, mental energy that we are radiating. Okay, that is why, for example, like Venerable or Bhante Mahinda, he has that 24-hour metta, because we suffuse the world with these positive energies. Imagine if thousands of people at the same time were to extend this wish for the well-being of other sentient beings, of other living beings. Well, it goes a long way. All right, so Buddhists strongly believe in that. But that's one aspect of this whole duo of loving kindness. The other one is compassion. Compassion is the wish for another being to be free from suffering. You see, so while loving kindness is talking more about may you be well and happy, may you have happiness, may you have well-being, compassion is the wish for another being to be free from suffering. Okay, now this is at the level of an attitude. Of course, compassion has to be translated into action, isn't it? All right, that's what it means by a compassionate living. But you cannot have compassionate action if you don't have a compassionate thought. Because like if you're familiar with the Buddhist teachings, in Dhammapada, it says the mind is a forerunner of all things. Yeah. So you must have that mental attitude, that mental wish that other living beings are free from suffering. So that is why you have, for example, Tzu Chi, isn't it? One of the most well-known Buddhist organizations that spends, a lot of time and effort involving in a lot of compassionate action. Okay, so that's the meaning of compassion, the wish for another being to be free from suffering. Okay, so loving kindness and compassion. So you can see they're actually interrelated. Now, very quickly, I'm not going to go through the Metta Sutta, but you know what this discourse is about. So it says, whatever living beings there may be, may all be happy. In anger or ill will, let him not wish another ill. All right. So in the Dhammapada, we also learned that hatred can never be overcome by hatred. Only by love can it be overcome. So likewise in the Metta Sutta. And here the next paragraph is very important because that forms the basis for our practice. Yeah. So in the Metta Sutta, it says, just as a mother would protect her only child with her life, even so, let one cultivate a boundless love towards all beings. So let him radiate boundless love towards the entire world. All right. So here the image of a mother. All right. So very, very important. In fact, in all Buddhist traditions, we said treat other sentient beings as if they are your mothers. Right. Okay, so especially in Asia, we have a lot of high regards for our mother, isn't it? Because we are born because of our mother. Our mother gives birth to us, and our mother brings us up. Right? That doesn't mean that we forget about the father, but somehow we always talk about the mother's instinct, the motherly love. We can talk about it, right? So in the Visuddhimagga, we find that this is further elaborated by Buddhaghosa. The Visuddhimagga, as you know, is a very well-known commentary to the Pali Canon. So here, Buddhaghosa says that what is a mother's love? So a mother's love is like, for example, when the baby is growing up. So you look at the baby, you have that love for the baby. You wish the baby would grow up quickly, so that the child can grow up well and happy. And then when the child is sick, you pay a lot of attention, you make sure that the child gets well. All right, you hold the child tightly, make the child warm, take the child to see a doctor. So you take every effort to make sure that the child is well and happy. And then when the child grows up to be a youth, then you share in his happiness. All right, when you see the son or the daughter, growing up, going to school, going to college, and going to university, then you feel happy for them, right? So that's how a mother, right, react. And finally, when the child has become an adult, so the mother learns to let go very calmly, but the love is always there. All right. So that is why, for example, even at my age, when I see my mother who is 93 years old, she will still look at me as, with a lot of love and affection and say, how are you? Do you take care of yourself? You have enough food to eat? At that age. So that's the kind of love that the mother has. So in the Visuddhimagga, it's trying to tell us that how do we cultivate that kind of mental attitude, positive attitude? Right? How do we develop that energy so that it's always stay with us? Right. So it's a beautiful illustration in the Visuddhimagga. Okay. So I thought I'd just share this with you. So it's not only because many people thought that this compassion is only found in Chinese Buddhism, is only found in Mahayana Buddhism. Even in Theravada Buddhism, there's a lot of emphasis on compassion and love. That's why, for example, you got the 4 Brahma Viharas. Right? Later on, I'll just show it to you. So loving kindness, according to Bhante Gunaratana, if you read this book called Mindfulness in Plain English, so as you can see, even though he's a great teacher of mindfulness also has to incorporate the aspects of compassion. Now, he says metta is present in 4 noble states. What are these 4 noble states? The loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. So when we practice metta, when all of us practice metta, compassion, joy, and equanimity grow naturally in our mind. So these four, they are actually interrelated. You can't really separate them. You cannot say, today I only practice metta, tomorrow I practice compassion. All right. And then later only I practice joy. They all come together very naturally. They grow naturally in our minds. And you will naturally be compassionate when metta grows in your heart. That's why we start with metta, isn't it? Right? And you will not be jealous of other success. If you can radiate loving kindness to all sentient beings, then you will not be jealous or envious of other success. And covetousness will not arise in a heart that is full of metta. Rather, you wish that the whole world is happy and peaceful. So that's the kind of mental energies that we want to cultivate. That's why when we practice metta. So there's another one which you may have heard. This I just thought I just mentioned here to you. One is Karuna. I think John Beyond mentioned just now is Karuna, which is, well, in a way, it's like empathy for those who are afflicted by suffering, and Anukampa, to tremble for the welfare of all beings. So when you see someone suffering, you have a certain feeling of like they say, you tremble, that you have that wanting to help other sentient beings. So in Pali, it's called Anukampa. So these are just two words I thought in case you come across that. Now, the related concepts, especially today in the field of psychology, like as I say, if you Google CCARE in Stanford University, then you find that words like empathy, altruism, compassion, they seem to come up. Now, empathy is primarily just an emotional experience of another person's feeling. It's just a mirroring of another person's emotion. Empathy may or may not lead to compassion, right? So that's a very important point. Empathy may lead to compassion if you have a right view about things, but empathy may just stop there. Yeah, you look at another, you feel another person suffering, it just stops there. Now, altruism, again, is an action to benefit someone. Again, it may or may not be linked to empathy, but compassion, making a donation, right? You can make a donation even out of fear, out of anger, all right? You know, some people can you know the word dana, isn't it? So that's why in Buddhism, we make a distinction between this word dana and chaga, C-A-G-A, chaga, all right? One of the six contemplations that we do is chaga nusati, for example, right? So while we all said dana is very good, of course, dana is very good, but we must always check our motivation. What goes behind our act of dana? Is it based on selfishness? Is it based on greed? Is it based on fear? Is it based on abhorrence for that person? All right, you see a beggar, you're having a nice bowl of noodles in a food court, and here comes a beggar walking towards you, and you can even smell the beggar, 10 feet away. So what do? You quickly take out maybe a 50-cent coin or a $2 note or a $1 note, and before he can come even near you, just throw the money to him and say, here, take it and go away. Well, that's giving. Isn't that a form of giving? But there's a giving based on either repulsion, giving that's based on fear, that fear that, hey, if it comes too near me, I may get COVID, even though I can have, and so on. So that's, in a way, is a form of altruism, but it's based not on very noble qualities. Right? Whereas when in Buddhism, we talk about chaga, C-A-G-A, when you do a donate, when you do giving, it is always based on selflessness. It's always based on what you believe that the other person would benefit. All right. Now, when you have compassion, is when you have the elements of both empathy and altruistic behavior combined. So it's a kind of an emotional response to help someone suffering, right? Overcome the suffering about it. So I thought it's very important for us to understand these three terms, because increasingly you find that these terms, they are linked to this understanding of compassion, okay? Now, one of the best ways to understand compassion for many people who do not want to be too bothered about reading texts or reading commentaries or reading books is to visualize the image of Kuan Yin. All right, now Kuan Yin, as you know, is a very popular image or icon in the northern school of Buddhism. Right, we have two schools of Buddhism: the southern school, which which many people call the Theravada school, and the Northern school, right, which is the Mahayana, the Tibetan. While you don't have the idea of Guan Yin in the Southern school, but the concept of Guan Yin can be seen as a manifestation of compassion, right? For example, if you look at the name itself, Guan Yin or Guan Shi Yin, right? It means one who hears the sound. In fact, from the original Sanskrit word Avalokiteshvara, one who looks down on the suffering of other sentient beings, or one who hears the sound of another suffering being. So Guan Yin then reminds us that the importance of compassion. In fact, if you ask someone who really practices Guan Yin meditation or Guan Yin contemplation, what they mean is that they want to be like Guan Yin, right? So praying to Guan Yin does not mean just going to a Guan Yin temple, bowing 3 times, right? Lighting joss sticks in front of Guan Yin. But it means more than that. It means actually, how do we become Guan Yin? How do we manifest ourselves like what Guan Yin would do? That means, how do we manifest compassion? Do we express ourselves like Guan Yin? So for the Orthodox Theravada, right, there are always some Orthodox Theravada who doesn't believe that there's such a being as Guan Yin. I always tell them that's fine. You don't have to believe in Guan Yin. But do you think that it's important to have compassion? Of course, it's important to have compassion. So if you practice compassion, there you are. You are already Guan Yin, right? Whether you believe in Guan Yin or you don't believe in Guan Yin, right? Okay, so I'm just going to skip that. So compassion, again, I just want to bring you back to some of the references to compassion, which is found in the Visuddhimagga. Since I think most of you practices in the Southern school, so I think it's important to be familiar with some of the important texts. Of course, this is the commentaries. So here in the path of purification, when it is said, when others suffer, it causes a good person's heart to be moved. Thus, it is compassion. So when you see other people suffering, is your heart moved? Do you say, too bad for him? Or do you say, well, that's his bad karma? And then you walk away. So then you're not a good person in that sense. You know this word good person. The Buddha uses this word sappurisa. Sappurisa, right? Someone who is, someone who has got kindness, who has got compassion. Alternatively, it combats other suffering and demolishes it. Thus, it is compassion. So you not only have your heart that's been moved, all right, like Thich Nhat Hanh says, is a verb. So you actually do something about overcoming the suffering of the other person. And how do you do it? There's so many ways. In today's pandemic situation, so many ways people do it. Many people don't have food to eat. So you give food to other people. You give food to our people out of compassion. So you demolishes the suffering of other people. Yes, one example. All right. You hear about the frontliners, they need all the PPEs, they need all the medical equipment. So you start maybe a project to raise funds so that to buy some of these PPEs or some of this medical equipment, and you give it to the frontliners. All right, like what Tzu Chi, for example, is doing, or like what many of the Buddhist groups, they combine to have the aid for India, but the Buddha's homeland. There was a couple of months ago when India was badly hit by the COVID-19. So those are expressions of compassion, putting into action compassion. All right. Alternatively, it is scattered upon those who suffer or extended to them by privation. Thus, it is compassion. Okay. So even in the Visuddhimagga, you find that Buddha Ghosha talks a lot about how we can manifest compassion, not just mentally, but physically, right? So always remember that compassion is not something we talk about, not something that we feel good about. Then in the Dhammapada itself, we say all beings tremble at violence, all fear death. Putting oneself in the place of another, one should not kill, nor cause another to kill. All tremble at violence. Life is dear to all. Putting oneself in the place of another, one should not kill, nor cause another to kill. Now, this morning you recited the 5 precepts, right? And of course, we all know that the first precept is for us to abstain from killing. We take that training not to harm other living beings, okay? But that's just one aspect of our living a compassionate life. The other part is missing if we only stop at the precepts, isn't it? So what is the positive aspect of the first precept? Not to kill someone, not to harm someone. The opposite would be to be compassionate to others. See, so maybe that sometimes was not emphasized. Sometimes we only say, oh, as Buddhists, we must practice the 5 precepts. Obviously, we have to practice the 5 precepts, but it's also important for us to understand that for each of the 5 precepts, there's always a positive counterpart to it. Just as we refrain from not harming other living beings, we practice compassion. While we abstain from not taking things that do not belong to us, we practice generosity and so on. So each of the 5 precepts, we must always remember the positive aspects. So I think in some Buddhist centers, the devotees, they chant, they recite not just what is called the Panchasila, they also recite the Panchadhamma, that means the 5 positive qualities that will allow us to live a compassionate life wisely and mindfully. Okay, so this is from the Dhammapada itself. Likewise, the Dhammapada continues, one who, while himself seeking happiness, oppresses with violence other beings who also desire happiness, will not attain happiness hereafter. Okay. Now, the next few slides, I thought I'll just share with you some of the expressions from His Holiness. There's a very beautiful book called The Compassionate Life. If you could have access to this book, then I think that you really appreciate the importance of having compassion as a positive mental energy in our everyday life. Now, in this book, he says, His Holiness says, my main concern is always how to promote an understanding of deeper human value. And this deeper human value is compassion, a sense of caring and commitment. Without them, you cannot be happy, right? So what he's saying here, if you read this book, is that when one is compassionate, one actually becomes happier. And interestingly enough, I mentioned C-Care. There's another body, another institution, which is in the forefront of doing research on compassion in our everyday life and compassion and neuroscience. That organization is called Mind Life Institute. Now, if you Google Mind Life Institute, you find that there are many research, many seminars, many conferences, which talks about how using neuroscience, for example, today, they are able to find that someone who practices compassion, all right, has a much happier, is much more happier, is much more emphatic towards other sentient beings. He lived a much richer life in that sense. Okay, so this book is actually talking about that. And then he says, the more we care for the happiness of others, the greater our own sense of well-being becomes. I think this was many years ago, like 2018, Harvard University did a research, and they found that those who practices mindfulness meditation, they tend to be happier. And with mindfulness, then it's linked to compassion, right? So later on I'll show. So there's a lot of linkage now. You find that with the rise of neuroscience, it becomes to validate many of the Buddhist teachings that we have always been talking about. Previously, we don't have the advantage of neuroscience to our support, right? So here His Holiness says, the more we care for the happiness of others, the greater our own sense of well-being becomes. So compassion leads to peace and harmony. I'm sure, like, for example, you have done something like, if for example, you have done something good, maybe you have made a donation, and then you realize that donation has actually gone a long way to help someone. You really feel good, isn't it? You feel happy about it. So that's where the third of the 4 Brahma Viharas comes in, joy, right? The aspects of joy comes in, okay? So you have a greater sense of well-being, a greater sense of happiness of having known that you have done something. I mean, I'm very, I would be happy to share with you that each time when I share a Dhamma talk, I always feel very happy. And, I have an altar, at home, I always make an aspiration that this Dharma talk that I share, if it can benefit most sentient beings, I'll be very happy, and may they all be happy. And, and because in the process of sharing the Dhamma, I learn so much from the questions that people ask, all right? So that's a form of compassion, because it's a compassion based on sharing the Dhamma for the benefit of all sentient beings, okay? So here, compassion leads to peace and harmony. This is a more recent book. It's called A Force for Good. Is actually edited by Daniel Goleman. I think many of you may have heard of his name, Daniel Goleman. Those of you who are in management, you would know that there's this concept called EQ, isn't it? Emotional cohesion. So Daniel Goleman was the one who actually started it. So, and he's a strong supporter of His Holiness, and he's also part of the Mind Life Institute, right? So here in this book, His Holiness says, compassion is innate. In a short while, I'll show you what is meant by that. And can be strengthened like a muscle. Mobilizing our compassion just might provide us much of the fuel needed to tackle humanity's most daunting challenges, from economic and racial inequality to the slow motion suicide our environment impact may bring. For example, in today's pandemic, you find that the number of people committing suicide has increased quite high, isn't it, compared to before the pandemic, all right? So this is where organizations that at the forefront on trying to help such people is, those are good things, that we should do. Okay, so compassion is innate. Just give you some example. Now, I just extract this because if you're interested, you can actually find out for yourself. It says that even for animals, this is research done at University of Chicago. Rats are driven to empathize with another suffering rat and to go out of their way to help it out of its quandary. Even rats have got that, right? And then Dr. Michael Tomasello from Max Planck Institute in Germany, they did the research on chimpanzees. And I read this research. It was actually talking about the two chimpanzees that were fighting. They were fighting, and there were other chimpanzees watching these two chimpanzees fighting. And then obviously in a fight, one chimpanzee would lose and one would win. So the chimpanzee that lost very badly was very, very devastated. So it was like, even chimpanzees, when they are devastated and they are very down. So this chimpanzee who lost would be keeping to himself in one end, while the other one who won would be very exuberant and so on. And what happens is another two chimpanzees who were watching this, they actually came to hug the chimpanzee that lost. Can you imagine this happening among chimpanzees, among animals, right? So even chimpanzees have got they spontaneously engage in helpful behavior, and this is what Michael Tomasello from Max Planck Institute in his research found, that even chimpanzees have this innate love for the fellow chimpanzees. So if animals have that, don't we humans have that too? All right, so these are just two reasons. The first one is on rats, okay? The second one is on chimpanzees, which I found very, really fascinating. The third one is on elephants. Elephants will give support to other elephants who are too weak to stand or who are emotionally distressed. Just like the chimpanzee that was very emotionally distressed because it lost, two other chimpanzees who was watching came to hug him, right? Just to make it feel good. So this book by Kathy Payne called Silent Thunder, in the Presence of Elephants. So it's even documented in the book. So you want to know how even elephants have got this compassion in them, all right? So, and Dr. Kettner from University of Chicago says that both animals and human beings have a compassionate instinct. So there's lots of research, and I purposely given you extracts from different universities, not all from one university. All right, I started off by showing you from CCARE, which is Stanford University, but I'm giving you examples of research which are done from various other universities, which tells to you about the importance of compassion being innate. So if compassion is innate, what more? Now, if you're familiar with the Buddhist text, if you're familiar with this sutta called the Pabasara Sutra, which is found in the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha says our mind is actually luminous, right? So you can Google that sutta. It's called the Pabasara Sutra. He says our mind is luminous, but our mind, but we commit unwholesome actions because our minds got defiled. So which means that we can purify our mind. Yeah, we can purify our mind. If compassion, even though it is innate in us, is not forthcoming, we can develop it. And how do we know that we can develop it? How do we know? Today, the neuroscience, there's this concept called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity tells you that actually our brain is malleable. You can transform. You can transform negative emotions to positive emotions. Right? So in fact, His Holiness, the Dalai Lama says that what is so wonderful about all our negative defilements is that they can be transformed. Right? So you can transform it. Why? Because ultimately, like in the Pabasara Sutra itself, it says our mind is luminous. So that gives us a lot of confidence, gives us a lot of faith that we can actually develop that compassion in us. Okay, so the last part, before I end, I just want to show you how compassion is also linked to mindfulness and wisdom. Okay, the compassion should not exist on its own. In fact, in many of the texts, compassion is portrayed like, and wisdom like the two wings of a bird. For a bird to fly, it needs wings. It needs two wings. So the left wing is compassion and the right wing is wisdom. If you only have one wing, you can't fly. You need two wings. And those two wings are compassion and wisdom. So let's look at what is wisdom here. Now, wisdom, from the Buddhist perspective, and I've given you the names of two sources. You can subsequently Google it and then read on your own. When we talk about right views, of course, this is found in the Noble Eightfold Path, but the Noble Eightfold Path don't really go into details on what is right view, right? Or right thoughts, but there are subsequent discourses, like, for example, you look at the Samaditi Sutta, right? Then it talks about what is right view. It is understanding of suffering and the end of suffering. So basically what compassion practice involved is we practice compassion because we realize that there is suffering in this world. Because there's suffering in this world, we try to alleviate the suffering of other sentient beings to the best of our ability. Why? Because this world is imperfect. Because samsara is imperfect. Can you save, can you, if you tell yourself that, oh, I want to be compassionate, I want to help every sentient being that I can. If you have that thought, which is a good thought, but you don't have wisdom, then you're going to have compassionate fatigue, what is called compassion fatigue, right? You know what is compassion fatigue? Because you'll be thinking, I want to save every living being. How am I going to save all the ants in my backyard? How am I going to save all the animals? How am I going to save all the insects? The thousands of insects. Are you going to save all the insects? You can't, right? So if you have that thought without understanding, then you have compassion fatigue. Okay, I was told that like Tzu Chi, when you know they're always the first when there's a natural disaster, isn't it? But before they send their team of people there, the team of people are very well trained to understand the nature of dukkha. So that when they face with dukkha, they are not overwhelmed by the suffering. Because if you're overwhelmed by the suffering, you cannot save, you cannot help other people, isn't it? All right. That is why the analogy of Kuan Yin with 1,000 arms. So that Kuan Yin have 1,000 arms to save 1,000 beings, but Kuan Yin is also a manifestation of wisdom, because Kuan Yin is the Buddha of wisdom. Is the Buddha of compassion, and Buddha is an enlightened being. So we need to have right views and our right thoughts of love, non-violence, and compassion. So when we have these two aspects clearly in our mind, then when we try to help other sentient beings, we know that there's a limit to what we can do. We will not set a limit, but we will continue to do. But when we know that it is time to stop, we'll take a rest. All right, we know when to take a rest, and then we continue again. All right, that is where equanimity comes in, isn't it? So when we, by the time you finish the sessions on the 4 Brahma Viharas, you understand that the compassion also has to be linked to equanimity. For example, you're doing your level best to help beings, but say, you may be a doctor, for example, or a frontliner. You do your level best to help the COVID victim. At the end of the day, out of your great compassion, you help them, but the being dies. Two things can result. You can be overwhelmed by it. If you're overwhelmed by it, then you'll not be able to help the next sentient being, the next human being who is down with COVID. All right. But if you have equanimity, you tell yourself, yes, I've done my level best. That's the best I could do. Unfortunately, that being cannot be saved. So you wish that being all the best. Right? But if that being could be saved, then you have mudita, then you have great joy. But if that being cannot be saved, you have equanimity. Right? Once you have equanimity, then you're able to revert back to your original state of mind, which is compassion and loving kindness. So you see these 4, they kind of move around. So it's very important, right, to always not forget the equanimity part. Okay. Now, just a last couple of slides on mindfulness. So because there's a lot of research been done about the linkage between compassion and mindfulness, right? So compassion comes more readily if people can be more openly aware of the present moment, right? When we do mindfulness meditation, we always talk about trying to understand the present moment, right? As it is occurring, particularly in the presence of others suffering, without reflective thinking or judgment. Thus, compassion hinges on mindfulness. So there's a whole conference, right, on the science of compassion. So if you can Google this, if you're interested to read about this, about the origins, the measures, and the interventions. So imagine a conference on the science of compassion. So compassion is no longer something that is the preserve of Buddhism or of any other religion, but is something that science has studied. Now, there's also a book called The Art and Science of Mindfulness. This is by Dr. Shona Shapiro, published by the American Psychological Association. The summary of this book is, there is now empirical evidence of the connection between mindfulness and compassion. The mindfulness increases compassion for others and for oneself, and it leads to decline in stress and negative emotions, and increases in positive emotions. So when we do mindfulness, all right, then you find that the side effect or the positive effect is that it increases compassion for others and for oneself. And it also leads to a decline in stress and negative emotions, right? So those who have, I'm sure many of you have heard of this program called Mbsr. Have you heard of Mbsr? Mindfulness-based stress reduction techniques. It was started, I don't know, maybe 30, 40 years ago by a doctor. She's not a medical doctor. He's actually a molecular biologist, John Kabat-Zinn. John Kabat-Zinn was trained in the Japanese Zen tradition, but he subsequently also learned Vipassana when he went to the Insight Meditation Society in Bari. And then a thought came that maybe he could use mindfulness meditation to cure his patients, all right, who could not be cured by normal treatment. Right? So when he started that, so all the other doctors at the School of Medicine, University of Massachusetts, said, look, John Kabat-Zinn, you want, take. And it seems that the first experiment, he got more than 60 patients who all the other doctors said, look, medical science can no longer treat you. So he put them through this I think it's an 8-week course on Mbsr, mindfulness-based stress reduction techniques. And boom, it became a success. And many of them got cured. So and today we talk about how many illnesses are psychosomatic, for example. They are actually a result of the mind. Okay. And I remember also in my early days, there was the late Venerable Bhante Suvano, who used to tell me stories about how through Vipassana, he was able to help many people. I think even he himself at one stage overcome cancer. Right. So there are a lot of now we're talking about empirical evidence. All right. But those days when I was first starting to study Buddhism, first starting to practice mindfulness meditation, there wasn't such kind of scientific backing. But today you have a lot. Right? Like for example, this book only came out in 2017, so it's a very recent research. Okay. So what I'm trying to show you here is that when we practice mindfulness, it's also linked to compassion. Right. So you can see all this. They are interlinked, interrelated in that sense. So mindfulness and behavior, that's the one that I mentioned. Mind Life Institute shows that meditation made people become altruistic to help others who are suffering, even in the face of the norm not to do so. Okay. So here studies have shown that benefits of meditation transfer off the cushion. So the benefits of meditation should not only be when you are sitting on your cushion, when you're on your cushion. Whereas when you're off the cushion, when you're in your everyday life, when you're in the workplace, for example, I was asked to give a talk about office politics and dynamics, and I was saying that mindfulness practice, understanding the Buddhist practice of the four Sublime States, it actually helps you to even deal with difficult people at the workplace. But if you have never tried mindfulness meditation, then those things will seem very strange. Okay, so meditation can be applied off the cushion, right? In that sense. So the last part is just to share with you some daily compassion practices that we could do. All right, we don't have time to go into details. Each one of it you can actually develop. Wake up with a positive thought. So when we wake up each morning, we greet each morning with this thought. Are we able to do this? Not a very difficult thing to do when we wake up. We have this thought in our mind before we even go and brush our teeth, right? We wake up before we even jump off the bed. Let's have this quick thought. Today, I'm fortunate to have woken up. I'm alive. I have a precious human life. I'm not going to waste it. I'm going to use all my energies to develop myself, to expand my heart out to others, to achieve enlightenment or compassion for all beings. Not a very difficult thing to do, isn't it? For us to wake up, right? Just to have that thought. Why? Because if we have that thought every morning, then it becomes second nature. It becomes part and parcel of our way of thinking. Then it becomes part of our compassionate way of life. But we got to start somewhere. We start small. All right. So we start with this. The other one is we cultivate empathy. Whenever we get that opportunity, we reflect or imagine a loved one who is suffering from an illness or a tragedy. We may have our neighbors, we may have our friends, even our relatives. Then imagine the pain he or she is going through in as much detail as possible. After doing this practice for a couple of weeks, we can then imagine, reflect on the suffering of others we know, not just those who are close to us. Many years ago, when my elder brother had lymphoma, so this was one of the practices that I did for him, because in the process, then I learned to cultivate some empathy, towards him and also to other beings who also may be suffering like him. So it's a good practice, right? So if you have someone that you know of, you can use that as an anchor for you to expand your practice to other people. Exchanging self for others. This is a very typical Tibetan practice. It's called Tonglen. Some of you may be familiar, but if you're interested, you can find the essential way to practice exchanging self for others is to regard the suffering of others exactly as our own suffering and to help others as if they were ourselves. Okay, so I'm not going to go into detail, but just to share with you, there are different methods. So you can read this book by Lama Zopa, right? And then see all beings as equal. You remember the earlier slide I talked to you about from the Visuddhimagga, where Venerable Buddha Ghosha says, that we treat all sentient beings like our mother. So instead of recognizing the differences within yourself and others, reflect on what we have in common. We are all human beings who need food, shelter, love, and happiness, isn't it? We all want to avoid suffering. Even the person you hate the most, even he wants to avoid suffering. Correct? So we reflect on these commonalities we have with every other human being and ignore the differences. Even our enemy wants happiness for himself and his family. I was listening to a talk, one of the speaker who is also a Vipassana practitioner, he was explaining how 5 years ago when Donald Trump was the president, so he actually had a big photo of Donald Trump in his altar. That doesn't mean that he's a great lover of Donald Trump, because so many people just don't like Donald Trump. So he used that because he himself doesn't like Donald Trump. So he used that to try to change his negativities about Donald Trump. He asked himself, does Donald Trump also wants happiness? Donald Trump also wants happiness. All right. So someone you really hate, right? So maybe you can have a photo of him to also reflect on that. Okay. Reflect on benefactors, reflect on our impermanence and suffering as a human being, birth, sickness, misfortune, eventually. And you reflect how others have benefited us. You think about where you are today, if not for the teachers who have actually taught you, if not for the parents who have brought you up, if not for your siblings who grew up with you, if not for your friends, your co-workers, sometimes even your enemy. So you open your heart to them and wish them well. So with constant practice, our feeling can grow and nurture in the real compassion. Now, all these different meditation practices, these are called meditation on compassion, right? I think most of the time we are familiar with metta, isn't it? Right? But there's also meditation on compassion, right? Just as there's meditation on joy, right? But somehow I think in the Southern tradition, we always emphasize a lot on meditation on loving kindness. Okay, but there are a lot. I'm just showing some examples how you can. For example, one of the meditation on compassion is meditation on this precious human life. That's another form of meditation. And sometimes I practice that, our meditation on this precious human life that we have, right? And this precious human life is so fragile. It can break anytime, right? Isn't it? When every week my company would report to me the number of people who succumb to COVID-19, and I would ask, how many of them already have double vaccination? And sadly enough, every week I get a report which shows that, well, last week we had 42 of our employees who got succumbed to COVID. All the 42 have got full vaccination, right? And some of them, and I think 1 or 2 of them even died. So you never know, right? So there's nothing is certain, right? As Ajahn Chah always says, nothing is certain, right? Nothing is certain. We live in uncertain times, and that's life. Okay, so we can reflect on that precious human life. So as long as we are alive, how do we make use of this precious human life? Very, very, very powerful message. And finally, before bedtime, before we go to bed, we reflect upon our day. Think about the people we met and talked to and how we treated each other. Think about the good and the bad deeds of thoughts we had done during the day. How well did we do? What could we do better? What did we learn from our experience today? Be joyful for the good deeds we do and strive to do better the next day. So those kind of simple practices before we go to bed and when we wake up, it doesn't take a lot of time. 5 minutes, maybe, just before we close our eyes, we just reflect on this, right? Okay, so and this is something which I learned from Ajahn Jayasaro. I think I shared with some of you before. He said before we go to bed, there's a reflection called Chaga Nusati, isn't it? So Chaga Nusati is like we reflect. Did we do anything good this past 12 hours when we were awake? Did we do anything good? Yeah, if we have, then we reflect on it. We feel joy. We feel happy. If we do not do anything good for the day, okay, maybe we didn't do anything bad either, right? Then the next day we will do something good. So we reflect. So in other words, contemplative. So we have a more contemplative life, compassionate life. So contemplation does not only mean that when you are sitting in meditation that you can contemplate. When you're out, as we said, when you're off the cushion, right? When you're about to go to bed or when you wake up, you immediately try to cultivate those kind of contemplative modes, if you like. Okay. So the summary is Compassion is the expression, right? Mindfulness is the method, and wisdom is the essence. Okay, so this is what is meant by one Dharma. Okay, so Joseph Goldstein, some of you know Joseph Goldstein, or you may even have attended some of his Vipassana classes, right? So he says that in this book called One Dharma, it doesn't matter whether you practice in the Southern school or Northern school, whether you practice Zen or Theravada, or whether you practice Mahasi method or Pakao method, it doesn't really matter. What is important is in your everyday life, do you have compassion? Do you have mindfulness? Do you have wisdom? So if you can practice all these three, then you are leading a good human life. Right, and as the Buddha says, you are what is called a sappurisa. A sappurisa means a good person, a person of integrity, a true person, right? A sappurisa, right? So, conclusion of this talk is that compassion is innate in us. So it's not that difficult. It's not something that's out of us. Secondly, it's good for us. So if it's good for us, we should practice it. Okay, and compassion can be developed. So if you cannot remember all the things I've mentioned, or you think they're not important, just remember these three things. Compassion is something in all of us, and it is good for us, right? And it can be developed, okay? And it must be developed together with mindfulness and wisdom. Okay, so finally, let us all make this prayer. May all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and its causes. May all sentient beings never be separated from bliss. And may all sentient beings be in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. So let us make this wish. And hopefully all of us will have a compassionate life, mindfully and wisely. Thank you. So I think we have about 25 minutes or 20 minutes. So I'm open for any comments or any questions or discussions. Anybody have?
So we are open now for any questions.
Or comments, you don't have to ask questions. You have some comment you like to add on, or certain things you don't agree, or certain things you heard otherwise. Right?
I have one.
Yes, Sister Penny.
Okay, earlier on when everybody is doing charity and Tzu Chi is keep on, showing, publishing their charity work, buying beds and whatever to the hospital. So there's a recording circulating. There's a guy is very upset and is condemning this Tzu Chi, why they do all this, because all these duties are supposed to perform by the government. And because of Tzu Chi doing so, all this government, the COVID-19, they have the money. Where are all these billions of ringgit gone to? They are supposed to buy beds, they are supposed to buy all this. So why Tzu Chi is taking our donation, taking his donation to go and buy beds? So he was saying that if Tzu Chi, when Tzu Chi asking for donation, never tell him that this money is going to buy beds. If he knew that his donation is going to buy beds, then he won't do it, because his money is not to buy beds. The buy beds duty is the government should do, not us, because they already have allocation of COVID-19 funds. So what do you think of it?
Well, yeah. Well, I think, whatever good deeds that people do, there will always be someone who will look at it in a very negative way. If this person, if he says that his money is not for buy beds, and he wants to donate to Tzu Chi, then he should ask Tzu Chi, what are you going to do with my money? All right? Did he in the first place ask Tzu Chi about this? Of course, if he had asked and then Tzu Chi told him it's meant to buy beds, and then he still give, then he cannot blame Tzu Chi for that. I think what is important is when we do a good deed, all right, it doesn't mean that if other people are doing a good deed, we should not do a good deed. All right, the government is doing it. All right, but when we find that despite what the government is doing, they may not be doing it right. Okay, fine. But if we can do something to help save lives, why shouldn't we be doing it? Why should we look at the negative part and forget the positive part? You see? So I think as long as, that's why I say it's an attitude. You know, it's an attitude of mind, because what is important is you are doing something to help. And I'm sure that is Tzu Chi's intention, just to help, right? Now, Tzu Chi someone can say that is not the most skillful way of doing. Obviously, they're entitled to their views, but as it is now, that is the way that they are best in. So if somebody have a better way of how that money can be used, I think those kind of views or proposals should be forthcoming. Yeah. So I think we should always learn to be very positive about things. Right? Okay. Because, well, governments, you know, we don't really know how well, you know, some people say, oh, what did the government do with all this money? We don't really know. But our immediate reaction is, oh, the government has siphoned off the money. Do we really know that? You know, if we do not know that, then of course we can have a neutral opinion, but rather than conclude that, oh, they have siphoned off the money, somebody has pocketed that money. I think that is not a very proper way to form a conclusion. Okay, because we do not know. But if you see it, then of course fine. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other feedback or comments? Well, the Tzu Chi also asked all of you to give money to buy bed.
Can I have another one?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Brother Benny, do you think that compassion sometimes is a characteristic that is born with? Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I had a couple of slides which says that it's innate. Innate means you are born with that, you know. And this concept of compassion being something innate in us is very prominent especially in the southern in the northern schools, right? In the Chinese Mahayana, in the Tibetan, they really believe that we have this Buddha nature in all of us, right? As I say, in the southern school, it's not so pronounced, but the Pabasara Sutra itself is a good indication to show that actually our mind is luminous, right? When we are luminous, it means we have all the positive qualities, but the mind got defiled because of this luminosity is defiled by defilements, greed, hatred, and delusion. So that's why we have a process of trying to overcome greed, hatred, and delusion. So in this place, like for example, the first precept, why do we observe the first precept? So that the positive counterpart is so that we cultivate compassion, isn't it? So compassion is something innate, but it has to be cultivated. It has to be cultivated, all right? Okay, that's why the 4 Brahma Viharas, we have it within us, but you don't cultivate it, it lies dormant there. Right, it lies dormant there. Okay, so I think personally, I think generally human beings we have innate good qualities. I think we are basically good by nature. Right? I think that's also very much an Asian philosophy. Like for example, in Japanese culture, they always believe that human beings are good by nature. Right, like you know, we talk about the infinite potential of employees, that the employees that we have, they are capable of doing good things, you know. So that's very much part of Eastern culture. So I think I think it's something innate, but you have to develop it, cultivate it.
In Confucianism, they also say Confucian also say human beings are born good.
Yeah.
Born good. Yeah. So. But how to cultivate? Because from my personal experience, I have two sons. You know. So I really observe and I really I really can see, but because I brought them up the same method, the same thing, you know, but they are totally different. They are totally different, yeah. you can tell one is very compassionate and one is tidak apa one. You know, it's not that he doesn't love us, but he tidak apa attitude one. You know, so the other one is very mindful and very compassionate. He will show it. He will show it very obvious. So how to cultivate? Because I brought both of them is the same method. You know, same thing.
Well, we can only do to a certain level because each one of us bring with us our own karma. You know, if you remember in the Chula Karma Vibhanga Sutta, Buddha says we are heirs of our own karma. We are heirs of our own karma. Yes, karma can be changed, but up to a certain extent, they themselves have to change their karma. So this is where proper understanding, proper education, but sometimes it's very difficult for some of them to change. It's not possible to change everybody, right? But some people can. So you may have the same method to bring up two children, two sons, for example. But you find that, like you say, you know, one grew up to be very compassionate and kind, the other one not so, right? Because sometimes they bring with them very strong karmic imprints from their past life. Okay, but that doesn't mean that they cannot change. Sometimes they may change at the later part of life. You know, the important thing is what we can do is to grow the seeds, right? Provide the seeds. We grow the seeds. You know, just in your garden. You know, during this pandemic, because I cannot travel, so I spend my time doing some gardening. So I've been growing a lot of long beans and lady's fingers, and you know, you grow the seeds. So some seeds take a long time to germinate. Some 2 weeks, they're up already. I think human beings are the same, you know. So it takes a while, but do not give up. You know, as long as you maintain the same kind of kindness and compassion towards, you know, towards them, you find that eventually they may transform, they will change, right? So some takes a little bit longer. Okay, so never give up.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments?
Yes, Brother Benny.
Yeah.
I believe most teachers have compassion. That is why they want and they can teach people. See, I'm given the task by a Buddhist society to mentor a group of 6 young so-called new Buddhists. I was also told that this is a group of very aggressive, very intelligent young people. They do not like to be told what to do, but they want to learn. I haven't met this group. Probably next week I'll meet them. Yet, but I'm being fed with this type of not so positive attitude about this group of people. So now, you see, one part of my mind, I was thinking, if they are so clever, so aggressive, so intelligent, then go and learn yourself lah. Then you don't need mentoring. Go ahead and learn. But the other part of my mind is telling me, I must have compassion for this group of young people because they can be very good Buddhist leaders in future and will benefit even more people.
Correct.
But the thing is, how to have compassion now for myself first before I will go and meet them to mentor them.
Well, first you must tell yourself that you are honored to be given this opportunity to mentor, you know, 6 young, as you say, very aggressive and very intelligent young men or young women, you know, so 6 of them. So number one, so you see it as a responsibility to the community, right? So it's your compassion to the community, all right? So in order to express that compassion in dealing with them, I think you need 2 things. One is you need to have that right motivation why you're doing it. You're doing it because you think helping 6 young men and women is the right thing to do, right? It's just the right thing to do to be able to develop someone. So that's the right motivation. And the second thing is then that's where you got to develop the skillfulness. Now, what type of skills do you need? Now, do you have those skills? Because dealing with young people, one has to be skillful, right? And in Buddhism, we talk a lot about being skillful.
Dealing with children, like in those for Dharma students, not a problem. But now they are adults.
Exactly.
They don't like to be told what to do.
Exactly.
Those children different. You tell them, they will do.
Sure. So that's why I said you got to be skillful. So you got to ask yourself, do you have the requisite skills to deal with these people? Now, if for example, are you adequately trained? Right? If you are not, then you may want to get yourself adequately trained.
This is part of my training to mentor them.
Yes, because you yourself needs to be adequately trained, isn't it? Right? Because if you are not, then number one, if despite the fact you have a good motivation, when you deal with 6 very different characters, 6 very different set of bubbling energies, you get very disheartened, you get disillusioned. After a while, you get frustrated, and that's not the original intention, you see. So you must also be prepared for that. In Buddhism, we like to say we cultivate what is called the beginner's mind, right? The beginner's mind. So in other words, we tell ourselves, yes, I want to help, but I need to know whether do I have the necessary skills. If you don't have, then you may want to try to understand, how do young people at the age think? Is it we used to talk about, like, we are maybe, I don't know, Gen X, Gen Y.
Yeah, correct.
They used to call it the strawberry generation. They look pretty, but the moment you're not careful, you break. So one has to be careful, because the way they look at things are very different.
That's right.
So one has to need to understand how young people think before one can actually.
Yeah, a bit challenging.
Challenging.
Yeah.
Give it a try. Give it a try.
Thank you. Yeah, of course I will. I have to.
Yeah. Good. Very good.
Brother Benny.
Yes.
Just now you're talking about this person who put up Donald Trump's photo nearer home. I don't know how to have compassion for our politicians. Right. A bunch of them, I don't know. What sort of, you're talking of compassion for all beings. So when it comes to this group of people, it's very difficult. What do you?
Okay. I can only share with you how I look at them. I look at it in 2 ways. One is compassion is also self-development. No, not pity. It's for my own self-development. Yeah. What I should have is peace of mind. Okay. So I always follow this maxim that is it something that an area of interest, an area of influence, right? Areas of influence means, is it something that I can do to change? Can I change these politicians? The only way I can change these politicians is through the election. All right. I mean, I can't go up there and shoot them. I can change them by doing that, but that's obviously not the case. The only way I can do is to change them at the election. Okay. But election is not coming yet. And so no point worrying about that. So what I can do now is to think of my own sanity, right? To tell myself that yes, you got this type of politicians, right? They are not the best crop of people we have up there, all right? But is there something I can do about it? I can't, all right? There's really nothing much that I can do about it. I'm in this country, all right? So I look at the positive side. At least they are still doing something, though it's not good enough. Maybe out of now, I don't know how many ministers we have, 32 ministers. If at least I can see 1 or 2 ministers working, then at least I will take my hats off to that 1 or 2 ministers. That's about the most that I can do. But if every day I wake up, I tell myself, oh, all these politicians are useless, they are hopeless, does it solve any problems? It makes me more upset, it makes me having more anger in my mind. It doesn't solve anything, right? So when I have an opportunity to change them, like the last election, Well, I voted for what I thought would be better politicians, but unfortunately, it didn't last. So again, I can, well, of course, I feel disappointed, but as long as I want to remain in this country, I just have to accept that that's the way it is now. And then I wait for the next opportunity if I can change. Of course, I can also be involved in civic groups, right? I can be involved in as many other rights group, to protest against what is wrong, right? So there are ways that we can do, but we also need to understand that there are certain things beyond our control, right? So if you're worrying about it, it's not going to help you. So always ask yourself, is this an area that you can change directly? If you can, do something about it. If you can't, just let it be. And then like you say, if they are really corrupt, they will have to bear their own actions, because if you really believe in the law of karma, then you believe that every action has consequences. And if you understand the Dharma deeply enough, you know that they may not experience the negative consequences in this very life itself, maybe in future lives. So then you have compassion for them in that sense. You have compassion for them, all right? Not for yourself, but for them, Yeah. So I suppose that's one way. Yeah.
So there's still a reason for compassion for them.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah, because they are also human beings, in that sense. They definitely have not done that well. Again, I do not know whether how corrupted they are, or whether they're really corrupt, or they're just negligent, or they're just inefficient. I do not know. But many people jump to the conclusion they're all corrupted. But I don't know. So can I make the conclusion? It could be just they are just purely inefficient, stupid. Maybe I've used the word bluntly, they may not be corrupted, but some, yes, they may be corrupted. But if I understand the law of karma, whatever they do, I mean, every action that they do have consequences. They have consequences, right? Okay. So important thing is for us to guard our own mind. That's the most important thing. I was just reading this biography of Tenzin Chodak, Dr. Tenzin Chodak. He was the physician to the Dalai Lama. When he was in prison in China, before he escaped from the prison in China, so he was badly tortured because he refused to, I think one of the things, he refused to take away the photo of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. For example, in China, if you have a photo of the Dalai Lama, you can be thrown in jail. So you're not supposed to do that. But Tenzin Chodak, been like many Tibetans, he continued to have that. So and anyway, they tortured him. He was badly bruised. And then finally, when he escaped, he went to India. Then he came to the West. So the journalists were interviewing him. And they could see, his all the scars, the physical injuries that he had on his body. And they asked him one question. He said, "What was your biggest fear when you were tortured by the guards, by the communists? What was your biggest fear? Was it that you feared that you would die?" He said, "To tell you the truth, my biggest fear was that I would lose my compassion for my guards." That was my biggest fear. He said, because as a Tibetan, I was taught the importance of compassion. So my biggest fear was that the moment I lose my compassion for the guards who tortured me, he says, I will lose all humanity. I will lose all hope. So and you can see all the scars on his body, the torture, and things like that. And yet someone like that, would still say that, So I think at the end of the day is how, so Buddhism, of course, is very much about self-development, but at the same time, if we can do something to make this world a better place, we do it. But we also know that this world is samsara. Samsara is never perfect. Because samsara is never perfect, it's very difficult for us to make it perfect. All right, but we can try. We can try. Okay, we can try.
Thank you.
Yeah, and in the process of trying to make it something imperfect to be perfect, and we can't do it, we try not to make things difficult for ourselves. In the
Yes.
sense that it turns bad on you.
Exactly. Yeah. As long as we know that we have tried our level best, as long as we have tried our level best. For example, as I said, you try to help someone, that someone may not even appreciate your kindness, right? So you just have to have equanimity, isn't it? But it doesn't mean that you have done the wrong thing. So maybe in future you will not do it that way, So some people, like even during the Buddha's time, was the Buddha able to convert everybody? No, isn't it? Right? I'm sure you remember there were stories where, like even in the Donas Sutta itself, so many discourses, some people said, of the Buddha have spoken to them, and they would just walk away and say, oh, so is it. So even with the time of the Buddha, some people by their nature, they're just not ready. Right? But as far as we are concerned, we do what is within our ability. Yeah, with kindness, compassion, with mindfulness. That's the most that we can do. And then after that, if it doesn't go the way we thought it should, we just be equanimous. Okay. Yeah, I know it's already 11:35. I don't want to take your time.
Okay.
Maybe some of you are busy. You may have to start cooking, or some of you may have to. Now you can have dine-in. Some of you may have lunch appointments outside now. Right?
Tapao
But
food
be careful.
already.
Tapao already. Okay. Right.
Okay. That's all we have for today. Thank you so much, Brother Benny, for sharing the Dhamma with us. We hope you all have gained much wisdom by listening to this Dhamma sharing today. Hold on, let me stop.